In 1942, a Hollywood studio was selling one of its stars to America as the most beautiful woman in the world. And that summer, the United States Patent Office granted her something the studio never advertised. Patent number 2,292,387, a secret radio system she designed to stop the enemy from jamming Allied torpedoes. The Navy looked at the movie star's blueprint and filed it in a drawer. So how did an idea the military shelved become the ancestor of the Wi-Fi in the phone in your pocket? And who was the woman they refused to take seriously? Years before any of that, she was sitting at dinner tables where nobody expected her to be listening. She had married Friedrich Mandl, one of the richest men in Austria and a munitions manufacturer whose factories armed the fascist governments then rising across Europe. Mandl was controlling and jealous, and he took her everywhere, including the business dinners where generals, engineers, and arms buyers came to talk weapons. She had grown up the daughter of a Vienna bank director who couldn't pass a streetcar or a printing press without explaining how it worked, so while the men traded technical talk, she was the one taking it apart in her head. One problem came up again and again, the problem of controlling torpedoes by radio. A radio-guided torpedo could be steered onto its target, but the enemy could find the control frequency and jam it, sending the weapon harmlessly off course. This was cutting-edge, largely secret military technology, and she was learning it not from a textbook, but from the men who built and sold it. In a few years, she would understand exactly what those dinners had been teaching her. In 1937, she got out. She left Mandl, reached Paris, and then London, where the head of MGM signed her and handed her the screen name that would soon make her one of the most recognizable faces in the world, Hedy Lamarr. Hollywood sold the face, and the part of her that had sat through those torpedo conversations went completely unmentioned. By 1940, the problem she had absorbed at those dinners had a deadline. The war was on, Allied ships were being sunk, and the torpedo jamming weakness was now a live military problem instead of dinner conversation. That year, at a party in Hollywood, she met George Antheil, an avant-garde composer whose most notorious piece, Ballet Mécanique, called for a bank of player pianos and propellers to fire in perfect unison. Wrangling mechanical instruments into agreement on timing was a problem he had wrestled with for years, and it had mostly beaten him. On paper, the two of them had nothing in common. In practice, that failure was the missing piece, because getting multiple machines to stay in perfect sync was exactly the mechanical problem Lamarr needed solved. What the two of them came up with is the part that still gets misunderstood today. Their idea worked like this. The weakness in a radio-guided torpedo was that it listened on one fixed frequency, so an enemy who found that frequency could flood it with noise and drown out the steering commands. Their fix was to stop sitting still. If the torpedo and the ship controlling it both changed frequency constantly, and changed together in the same secret pattern, an enemy listening on any single frequency would only ever catch a fraction of a second of the signal before it jumped somewhere else. You can't jam a channel you can't predict. Picture two people holding a conversation across a crowded room while switching languages every few words on a schedule only they know. Anyone eavesdropping just hears noise. The hard part was keeping both ends on the same schedule, and that's where the composer's expertise came in. They proposed coordinating the hops with a mechanism like a player piano roll, punched with the pattern. Two identical rolls, one in the ship and one in the torpedo, would advance in lockstep and walk both radios through the same sequence of frequencies at the same instant, so the link stayed connected while an eavesdropper heard only fragments. It was a strange, almost musical solution to a military problem, and nothing else in 1941 worked quite like it. In the patent, they specified up to 88 frequencies, a direct nod to the 88 keys on a piano. They filed it in June 1941 under her married name, Hetty Kiesler Markey, alongside Antheil, and in August 1942 the Patent Office granted patent 2,292,387, the secret communication system. On paper, they had invented frequency hopping. She could have stopped at the patent and gone back to the studio, but she didn't. She offered the whole thing to the U.S. Navy, expecting they would build it, and the Navy shelved it instead. The official reason was that the player piano mechanism was too bulky and too fragile to survive inside a torpedo, and there's some engineering truth to that. But the reception she got had another layer. A movie star and a composer weren't who the Navy pictured when they imagined weapons inventors, and because Lamar wasn't yet a U.S. citizen, the government classified her patent as enemy alien property and effectively seized it. She had fled a fascist arms manufacturer and handed the Allies a way to protect their own weapons, and the reward was to have the idea taken from her on a paperwork technicality. You would think someone in the room would have pushed to at least test the thing, but nobody ever did. Instead, the Navy suggested she help the war effort in a way better suited to her image, and she sold war bonds. She was extraordinary at it, raising around $25 million over a bond tour that ran through 16 cities in 10 days. That's real money for the war effort. It's also the exact swap this whole story turns on. The country was happy to put the most beautiful woman in the world to work selling bonds. It couldn't imagine putting her patent to work. The patent expired in 1959, the same year Antheil died, and neither of them ever earned a cent from it. If the story ended in that drawer, Lamar would be a footnote, the actress with the strange hobby. It doesn't end there because engineers eventually came back to the idea. By then, this wasn't really about one patent anymore. Engineers at Sylvania picked up the concept in the late 1950s and rebuilt it with transistors instead of paper rolls. By the early 1960s, transistorized frequency hopping systems had entered U.S. military use, the secure communications idea finally running on hardware small enough to matter, with neither of the two names on the original patent attached to any of it. The broader principle, spreading a signal across many frequencies so it's hard to jam or intercept, grew into an entire family of techniques called spread spectrum. That headline you have probably heard, that she invented Wi-Fi, is the story the public knows. The engineering underneath it tells a more specific one. Spread spectrum split into two main branches. One is frequency hopping, the idea Lamar and Antheil patented, jumping between channels in a set pattern. The other is direct sequence spread spectrum, a different method entirely, and it's the one that today's Wi-Fi and GPS mostly run on. So the clean line that Wi-Fi runs on her invention is an oversimplification. The honest version has a twist worth knowing. The very first Wi-Fi standard, back in 1997, actually did include a frequency hopping mode, before the industry moved over to the other branch. The device that descends most directly from her patent is the one people mention least. Bluetooth uses frequency hopping almost exactly the way she and Antheil described it, splitting the 2.4 gigahertz band into 79 channels and hopping between them roughly 1,600 times a second to stay ahead of interference. The Bluetooth Trade Group expects more than 5 billion Bluetooth devices to ship in a single year, and every one of them is hopping frequencies. GPS and older cellular networks lean on the sibling method, direct sequence, spreading each signal thin across a wide band with a pseudo-random code instead of hopping. The phone in your hand is usually running both branches at once, hopping frequencies on Bluetooth while its GPS lock leans on that spread-out sibling method. Put the whole family together, and it underpins most of modern wireless. One study prepared for the Wi-Fi trade group put the yearly economic value of Wi-Fi alone at around $3.3 trillion. That is the scale of the world that grew on top of spread spectrum. The same basic instinct she and Antheil wrote down in 1941, that you protect a signal by refusing to keep it in one place. None of this makes her the lone genius of the popular story. She wasn't working in a vacuum. Other inventors had patented related frequency-changing schemes back in the 1930s, and the patent examiner even rejected the broadest version of her claim as something already known. What she and Antheil actually did was see the whole system, and see it a good 2 decades before the electronics existed to build it properly. The recognition came late, and it came mostly at the very end of her life. In 1997, more than half a century after that drawer, the Electronic Frontier Foundation gave her and Antheil a Pioneer Award, and her reported reaction was 3 words: "It's about time." She died in January 2000 at 85. The bigger honors arrived after that: a posthumous place in the National Inventors Hall of Fame in 2014, and a Google Doodle in 2015 that introduced a new generation to the patent behind the face. The studio that called her the most beautiful woman in the world was right about the marketing and wrong about the woman. The mind that took apart streetcars in Vienna and sat through torpedo briefings in Austria had seen a solution roughly 2 decades before the electronics could deliver it. On the honorary grave that Vienna later gave her, there's a line credited to Lamar that films belong to a certain time, but technology is forever. The frequency hopping idea she was dismissed for is doing its quiet work every time your earbuds connect, your car unlocks, or your keyboard talks to your laptop without a wire. They called her a pretty face, and more than 80 years later, the patent behind it is still running inside the phone in your pocket.